The kingdom of Valenreach lay under a gray sky, the clouds heavy like the weight of an unspoken threat. The war had lasted longer than anyone alive could remember, and even the strongest warriors bore the scars of battles that left towns in ash and forests in silence. Among them, none were more feared and admired than Aurelian, the commander called the Iron-Willed. She had survived every battle, every ambush, every blade that had ever sought to pierce her armor. Yet the armor she wore was more than iron. It was a shield against the world, against memories, against herself. Aurelian walked along the marble halls of the capital, her steps echoing softly, the click of her armored boots a metronome of her discipline. She was tall, strong, and precise, her hair tied back to reveal sharp eyes that never betrayed weakness. Nobles and courtiers stepped aside as she passed, murmuring respect and fear. She had never been loved in the ways stories told, but she had earned a name no enemy could ignore. Today, however, the court was quiet in an uneasy way. Whispers seemed heavier, as if the walls themselves feared what was coming. The king, Caelys, awaited her in the council chamber. He was young, with a gaze that carried both command and weariness. Rumor had it that the royal bloodline carried a curse. The throne demanded sacrifices, and the king could never keep what he loved. He ruled with fairness, yet something haunted him, a shadow that even his soldiers could not chase away. Aurelian entered, her armor gleaming despite the dim light. Caelys did not rise, he never did. He watched her with an intensity that could cut through steel. "General," he said, voice low but commanding, "your victories on the field are unmatched. Yet I ask you now to stay within these walls." No one had ever spoken to her like this, not her fellow soldiers, not the generals, not even her own family who had once betrayed her. To hear care hidden behind authority was almost painful, like a blade sliding under armor. She kept her voice steady. "My place is on the battlefield, sire. The people need someone who does not falter." She had spent her life proving that she needed nothing, that weakness was the enemy of survival. And yet she felt it now, something foreign, something unsteady, as though the armor she wore was suddenly heavier. The council chamber's door creaked, and a page entered, bowing low. "My lord, the northern borders have reported movements, strange shapes." Shadows where no shadow should be. And yet she felt the stirrings of fear, not for herself but for the kingdom, and perhaps she did not wish to admit for the king. "You will prepare the army," Caelys said, returning to his commanding tone. "But I want you near the capital for the next fortnight. I will need your guidance here. I will need your mind as well as your strength." Command and duty pulled her one way, instinct and pride pulled her another. But she saw something in the king's eyes, something rare, the vulnerability of one who carries the weight of a kingdom alone. "Very well," she said finally. "But know this, sire, the battlefield waits for no one. Nor does destiny." It reminded her of the girl she had once been, before betrayal had forced her into armor, before trust had become a weapon she could not wield. A soft sound made her turn. A small child, no older than 7, stood by the fountain watching her. His eyes were wide with curiosity, unafraid. "Are you a soldier?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Aurelian knelt, lowering herself to meet his gaze. "I am," she said simply, "but soldiers are not always brave. Sometimes they are just careful. Even the strongest feel fear. It is what we do with it that matters." Night fell over Valenreach. Candles flickered in the chambers of the palace, and the city grew quiet under the watch of stone statues that had seen centuries pass. Aurelian stood by the balcony, staring at the horizon where mountains met clouds. Somewhere beyond, the war waited. Somewhere beyond, the curse stirred. And somewhere in the silence between the two, the king watched, not as a ruler, but as a man who carried solitude as deeply as she carried her armor. The moment was broken by a messenger arriving in haste. A sealed scroll, stamped with the mark of the northern borders, trembled in his hands. "General Aurelian," he said, breathless, "the shadows have taken a village. Survivors speak of shapes with no faces, of soldiers turned to stone. They say the curse has awakened." "The first of many," he said quietly, "and this time it will not wait for dawn." Not her sword, but her willingness to see, to feel, to trust. That night, as the palace slept, she could not close her eyes. Dreams of fire and shadow visited her, soldiers she had lost reaching out with empty hands, calling her name. She walked the halls silently, listening to the wind whisper through cracks in stone. For the first time, she wondered what it would mean to lay down her armor, not the iron, but the armor she had built around herself. And somewhere in the darkness, King Caelys watched her, wondering the same thing. If the strongest soldier in his kingdom, the woman who survived every battle, could survive the moment someone removed her armor. The sun had barely risen over Valenreach, painting the city in pale gold, yet a chill lingered in the air that no sunlight could chase. Aurelian stood on the balcony of the palace, her armor polished but heavy on her shoulders. The message of the curses awakening weighed more than steel. Her hands, though steady, felt the tremor of unease she had long denied. King Kales entered quietly behind her, the morning light catching the lines of his face. There were shadows beneath his eyes, marks of sleepless nights spent carrying a kingdom on his back. Unlike her, he bore no physical armor, but the weight he carried was no lighter. "They have named you," he said softly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "The curse, it marks those who are strong, who shine. It recognizes the heart behind the armor." She did not flinch, but inside a storm began to stir. To be seen as the strongest, it was a truth she had never wanted to acknowledge. Her victories had always been measured in shields broken and enemies defeated, not in hearts observed. "I have faced death," she said, voice steady. "I have stared at fire, at blades, at men who would kill without thought. A curse is no different. On what you refuse to show the world, on trust and fear and loyalty, it will not be defeated by sword alone." Armor could protect her from arrows and swords, but could it protect her from fear, from loss, from the pull of something she had long denied? The morning passed in a blur of council meetings and urgent messages. The northern borders were restless, villagers fleeing, shadows moving where no shadow should exist. Soldiers whispered of horrors glimpsed in the fog, and the air itself seemed to tremble under the unseen weight of the curse. Yet through it all, Aurelian remained composed, her mind sharp, her presence commanding. But the more she held herself together, the heavier her armor felt. It was no longer just metal, it was her walls, her fears, her unspoken grief. And the king, Kales, he seemed to notice. In the mid-afternoon, the king summoned her to the strategy room. Maps of the kingdom lay spread across the table, dotted with tokens representing armies, villages, and threats. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows that danced like living creatures across the walls. "You must remain here," Kales said, his tone firm. "The border lords will follow your command. You will guide the army, but from the capital, I need you close. And I fear losing more than just soldiers. I fear losing you." "I will remain." To trust someone, to allow someone to see behind the armor, was a risk she had not allowed herself to take since the betrayal of her family years ago. The hours stretched into evening. The castle seemed unusually silent, as if the walls themselves waited for the first sign of the curse. Aurelian moved from room to room, inspecting soldiers, overseeing preparations, ensuring every detail was perfect. She was a commander, a shield, a wall against chaos. And yet in the quiet moments she felt the pull of something more, the weight of being seen. Kales joined her again as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky turned shades of red and violet, casting the city in a glow that was both beautiful and ominous. He stood beside her, silent, watching the shadows stretch across the courtyard. "Do you fear it?" she asked suddenly, her voice quiet. "The curse," he replied without hesitation. "No, I fear what it will take from us if we are not careful. I fear losing what is worth keeping." There were battles to prepare for, lives to protect, and a curse to confront. But the world had a way of bending the strongest armor. That night, a scout returned from the northern borders with news that sent a chill through the castle. Villages had been destroyed, fields burned, and shadows moved through the mist, attacking without sound or mercy. Survivors spoke of soldiers frozen in place, their bodies turned to stone, eyes wide with terror. The curse was no longer distant, it had begun its work. Aurelian studied the report, her hands tightening on the table. "We cannot fight it with swords alone," she said. "It is not flesh or steel that suffers, it is the mind, the heart." He had watched her for hours, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands never truly relaxed. He reached out almost unconsciously and rested a hand lightly on hers. The touch was brief, almost accidental, yet it carried a weight that neither of them ignored. "You do not have to bear it alone," he said softly. Aurelian drew back slightly, startled. She had not expected compassion, nor understanding, nor kindness. Armor could shield her from weapons, but not from truth, and this was truth she had long avoided. "I do not fear the curse," she said firmly. "I fear what happens if I let it see me as I am. Not as the iron-willed, but as Aurelian." She walked the halls, restless, listening to the soft creak of the floorboards, to the whisper of wind through the open windows. Soldiers passed her with bowed heads, courtiers murmured in fear, and the king moved through the shadows beside her, a silent presence that was both comforting and terrifying. Eventually, they reached the balcony again, overlooking the city. The moon was a pale silver blade in the sky, casting long shadows that danced across the stone. The air was cold, carrying the scent of ash and rain and something undefinable, something that spoke of destiny, of danger, of the heart. "You know the prophecy," Kaylee said quietly. "It speaks of a warrior and a king bound together by fate. One will protect the kingdom, the other will protect the heart. Both will be tested, both will be tempted, and only together can they survive." And yet the prophecy suggested she had not survived the one battle that mattered most: to trust, to be seen, to let someone in. She looked at the king, and for the first time she did not see a ruler. She saw a man who carried solitude like a weapon, a man who had known loss and fear as deeply as she had. And for the first time she wondered, what if the armor she wore, the armor she believed kept her alive, was also keeping her from truly living? The wind rose suddenly, rustling her cloak and the banners that lined the balcony. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled, signaling a new threat, a new beginning. Aurelian tightened her fists, feeling the familiar strength of her body, the steady pulse of her heart. Yet beneath it all, a new awareness stirred, one she could not ignore. She had survived every battle, but the war within was only beginning. Night had fallen over Valenreach, and the palace seemed to hold its breath. Aurelian stood at the edge of the balcony, her gaze fixed on the mountains in the distance. Shadows crept across the city like dark veins, and the air itself seemed to hum with unease. The curse had begun its work, though no one yet knew its full reach. For the first time in years, Aurelian felt the armor on her shoulders heavier than ever, not the metal, but the walls she had built around her heart. She had survived every battle, endured every blade, yet the unseen threat gnawed at her resolve. She had fought men, beasts, even fire, but this force, this creeping darkness, tested not her strength but her spirit. A soft sound drew her attention. Kaylee's had joined her again, silent, as though he had appeared from the shadows themselves. His dark eyes held a weight she recognized, loneliness, worry, and something more. "They have reported new movements," he said quietly. "The curse is spreading faster than we anticipated. Soldiers speak of voices in the mist, shadows moving where none should be. And some say it can touch the living before the dead. We will fight it as we fight any enemy, carefully, strategically, without panic." Aurelian stepped back, regaining her composure. "The curse has no hold on me," she said. "I am steel, I am iron-willed, I am—" Her voice faltered, though she did not admit it. She had never let anyone see her doubt. Kaylee's remained close, his eyes searching hers. "Even steel can bend," he said softly. "Even the strongest walls can crack if we refuse to see what is behind them." Her armor, once a source of pride, suddenly felt like a prison. Each movement was heavy, each breath measured. For the first time, she wondered if surviving every battle had prepared her for this, the battle within. A sudden alarm shattered the quiet. A scout had returned from the northern borders, panic in his voice. "General Aurelian," the scout gasped, "the curse, it has moved closer. Villages are being swallowed by shadows. Soldiers who confronted it, they did not return. Those who fled speak of voices calling their names, of visions, of fear itself made real." "Prepare a detachment," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "We will investigate and, if necessary, confront it. The kingdom will not fall while I stand." She wanted to trust, to lean on someone, to feel that she was not carrying the weight of the world alone. But trust had always been dangerous, and walls had kept her alive. To let them fall was to risk everything. The night stretched long as they rode toward the northern borders. The air grew colder, heavy with mist, and the faint whispers of the curse seemed to ride on the wind itself. Shadows twisted around trees, moving in ways that defied logic. The soldiers were tense, hands on hilts, eyes scanning the fog. Aurelian led them with the precision of a veteran. Each step, each command, each calculation was perfect. Yet with every moment, the armor on her heart felt tighter, heavier, as if the curse was not only outside but inside her as well. They reached the village as dawn began to break, painting the sky in muted reds and golds. The scene was horrifying, yet surreal. Homes were intact, yet the streets were eerily empty. Soldiers and villagers alike stood frozen, their eyes wide with silent terror. It was as though life had been paused, trapped in a moment of fear. Aurelian moved carefully among them. She placed her hand on one soldier's shoulder, her voice calm. "You are safe now. The curse cannot touch you here." "Feel it," he whispered. "Do not fight it alone." She could hear them, faint but insistent, voices whispering doubts, memories, fears. Every battle she had survived, every enemy she had faced seemed small compared to this. She felt her knees weaken, her breath catching. Kaylee stepped forward, taking her hand in his. "You are not alone," he said, firmly but gently. "Let me help you." For the first time, she allowed herself to see, not the king, not the ruler, not the strategist, but a man who had endured his own battles, who bore his own scars. And in that moment, something shifted. She lowered her guard, not fully, but enough that he could see the truth beneath the armor. The curse sensed it. The shadows recoiled, then surged forward, testing the bond between them. Aurelian felt fear, yes, but not paralyzing fear. She felt connection, trust, something she had long denied herself. The presence of another human, steady and unwavering, gave her strength in a way swords never could. The first shadow approached fully, tall and dark, faceless. Aurelian raised her sword, yet the blade did not touch it. The shadow was not flesh, not matter, not steel. It was doubt, fear, and pain made visible, and she realized this battle required something different, not force, not strategy, but acceptance. "Face it," Kaylee's urged, his hand still holding hers. "Do not hide, do not fight it alone." The shadow recoiled almost as if surprised. The whispers quieted. The tension in her armor, both physical and emotional, began to ease. The soldiers watched, astonished, as their general, iron-willed Aurelian, stood calmly among shadows that had frozen entire villages. Yet her calm was not cold, it was resolute, born of trust, courage, and willingness to be seen. "You see," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone, "strength is not only in surviving battle, strength is in surviving fear and in surviving yourself." The shadows faded with the rising sun, dissolving into mist, leaving the village intact but shaken. Soldiers and villagers alike blinked, uncertain whether they had witnessed magic, courage, or both. Aurelian lowered her sword, breathing heavily, her hands trembling slightly. She glanced at Kaylee's and for the first time allowed herself a faint, real smile. "You survived," he said softly, "and not because of armor or swords or strategy. You survived because you let yourself be seen, because you trusted." Aurelian felt the weight of her armor differently now. It was still there, strong and protective, but no longer a prison. And Kaylee's, once just a king she respected, had become something she could not yet name, a steady presence she might one day trust fully. Yet even as hope returned, a whisper in the wind reminded her that the curse had not been defeated. It had been delayed, deterred, but not destroyed. And somewhere beyond sight, something ancient watched, waiting, patient and hungry for the moment she allowed herself to falter. The palace was quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. Aurelian moved through the halls like a shadow, her armor lighter now, though her heart carried a weight heavier than any steel she had ever worn. The events at the northern borders had left their mark. Villages were safe, for now, yet whispers of the curse spread faster than soldiers could travel. King Kaylee's watched her from a distance, careful not to disturb her, yet unable to look away. He had seen her courage, her strength, her brilliance, but now he saw something deeper, the quiet vulnerability she had allowed herself to show. That moment, fleeting yet infinite, had changed the balance between them. The morning brought urgent news. Scouts reported that the curse had moved closer to the capital itself. Shadows had appeared near the outer walls, moving silently among the city's citizens. Panic threatened to rise, but Aurelian stood firm, calling for calm and order. Soldiers and townspeople alike looked to her, their unspoken trust a reflection of the many battles she had survived. "We cannot fight this with swords," Aurelian said to the council. Her voice carried authority, yet beneath it was a hint of urgency. "We must confront it with courage, strategy, and awareness. The curse feeds on fear. If we falter, it will grow stronger." Aurelian felt them brush against her mind, testing her resolve. She tightened her grip on her sword, though she knew that steel alone would not save them this time. Kaylee's rode beside her, his eyes scanning every movement, every shadow. "We face the curse together," he said quietly. "Not as king and general, but as two people who must protect what they care for." The words were simple, yet heavy with meaning. Together, not alone. She had survived every battle by relying on no one but herself. Now she felt the impossible temptation to trust another, to lean on someone who had proven both strength and loyalty. They reached the city outskirts where shadows had been reported. Villagers huddled together, fear etched in every line of their faces. Aurelian dismounted, moving among them, speaking words of reassurance. "Do not fear what you cannot see," she said. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act in spite of it. We will face this together." "Not if we stand together," she said. The shadows are strong, but fear is weaker when we face it as one. It was courage, trust, and resolve that would matter. Kaylee stepped forward beside her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You are not alone," he said, steadying both himself and her. "We face this as equals. Let the armor fall, even if just for a moment. Let the strength in your heart shine through." For the first time, she considered letting go of the last layers of her armor, not the metal, but the walls she had built around her emotions. It was terrifying. Trust was dangerous, vulnerability was dangerous, and yet it felt like the only way to survive. The shadows surged, coalescing into shapes that seemed almost human, yet impossible. They whispered doubts and fears, naming regrets and secrets hidden deep within the heart. Aurelian felt the pull, the pressure of years spent hiding her true self. She could feel herself faltering, could feel panic rising, yet she did not retreat. Kaylee's hand tightened on hers. "Do not fight this alone," he urged. "I am here, trust me as I trust you." She lowered her guard, letting him see her fear, her pain, her doubts. She let him share the weight she had carried alone for so long. The effect was immediate. The shadows recoiled as if confused by her sudden openness. Their whispers faltered. Their forms wavered, flickering like smoke in the wind. Aurelian realized the truth. The curse was not defeated by strength alone. It was confronted by courage, yes, but courage tempered by trust, by willingness to be seen, by the acceptance that no one could carry every burden alone. The village watched in awe as the commander who had never shown weakness now stood unarmed, unshielded, yet unafraid. Beside her, Kaylee's mirrored her stance, steady and unwavering. Together they faced the shadows, not with blades, but with presence, with heart, with courage. Hours passed, yet the shadows eventually dissipated, retreating into the mountains from which they had come. The village remained intact, the people unharmed, though shaken. Aurelian lowered her arms, her breath coming in steady, controlled gasps. She felt drained, yet unbroken. She had survived, but not as she ever had before. Kaylee's turned to her, his dark eyes filled with admiration, respect, and something deeper, something unspoken. "You were incredible," he said softly. "Not because of skill or strength or armor, but because you allowed yourself to be real, to be human. Perhaps the strongest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves." As they rode back to the palace, the sun setting behind them, Aurelian felt a shift within herself. She was still iron-willed, still a warrior who had survived every battle, yet something had changed. The weight of her armor no longer pressed against her chest in the same way. She felt lighter, and yet she knew this was only the beginning, for the curse was patient. It did not strike quickly. It tested, it waited, it observed. And the bond between her and Kaylee, strong as it had become, would be tested as well. Back at the palace, the council awaited their report. Aurelian recounted the events, the retreat of the shadows, and the need for vigilance. Yet she did not speak of the moments with the king, the quiet trust, the sense of shared burden that had altered her heart. Some battles were personal, she realized, and some victories were invisible. That night the palace seemed quieter, but Aurelian could not rest. She wandered the halls, her armor set aside, moving like a ghost among the corridors. Kaylee's found her eventually, waiting silently at the balcony. "You are still restless," he said softly, stepping closer. "I cannot stop thinking," she admitted. "The curse, it will return, and I fear that next time it will demand more than courage or trust. It will demand choice, sacrifice, perhaps even hearts. Whatever it asks, whatever it demands, we will not face it alone." Yet for the first time, she did not feel entirely alone. And that knowledge, fragile as it was, gave her courage. Armor could be removed, walls could be lowered, but the courage to face fear with someone by your side. This was a power she had never known until now. The night deepened, carrying with it the distant sound of wind through the towers, the whispers of a city on edge, and the lingering presence of something older than memory. The curse had retreated for now, but it had learned, observed, and waited, and it would return stronger than before. "She survived every battle, but not the moment I removed her armor,"